Hey, ambitious business owners, are you sick and tired of marketing that just doesn't cut it? Feeling like you're shouting from the void in social media, wondering why your competitors are killing it while you're stuck in the mud? Well, I've got some freaking great news for you. It's time for you to stop shitty marketing and start fucking nailing it. If you're ready to ditch the guesswork and finally attract those dream clients, then listen up. I'm introducing the Business Accelerator Mastermind, your rocket ship to client magnet status and serious cash flow. It's time to break free from those quiet crickets and unlock the next level in your business. Now, I know you might be thinking, Deirdre, just another mastermind. What's so special about this? Well, it isn't your average program. In Business Accelerator, we cut the fluff and get straight to the good stuff. We'll talk about magnetic messaging, where we're crafting a message that actually connects with your ideal clients, making you stand out from the copycat crowd. We're going to turn your business into a client attracting machine. And what I mean by this is turning your social media into a lead generation powerhouse that works for you, not against you. And we're going to work on your thought leader status by establishing yourself as the go-to expert in your field, the one that everybody wants to work with. And the best part, Business Accelerator is for action takers. So if you're ready to break out of that 100K income ceiling where you've been stuck and you're ready to unleash your business potential, well, then you belong here. You don't have time for wasted efforts. You need a proven roadmap to success. Think of Business Accelerator as your marketing secret weapon, where you're going to get ready to transform your business with the BMC method. You're going to get personalized support and a community that's got your back. You can say goodbye to any marketing misery and hello to confidence, hello to clarity, and hello to a thriving business. Okay, I get it. Hearing it from me is one thing, but how about this?
For a long time now, I've had this goal of hitting 20K in 1 month. And so if all of that pans out, the total revenue plus projected revenue comes to around 36,750 USD.
Ready to ditch the frustration and finally see the results you deserve? Well, Business Accelerator is your ticket to success. Applications are open right now, but only for those willing to put in the work up front. Visit www.deirdremartin.ie/business accelerator to see if you've got what it takes.
What I would say is, first thing is have a privacy policy on your website. You need to be able to prove or show that you are responsible with people's data. We must tell people how we're using their data or what we're doing with their data before we start collecting their data.
I am streaming the Master Your Business podcast again, but this time I am joined by the compliance specialist, Margaret Julian. Margaret, you are so welcome. Delighted to have you on the show.
I'm thrilled to be here, Deirdre. Really, really excited to be here because I'm always listening to your podcasts and you've always got such great tips and on LinkedIn and everything. So it's a real honor actually to be here today, to be one of your guests. Thank you.
Thank you. You've just made my day, Margaret. So, Margaret, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, what's the day job, and educate us a little bit for those who are listening. Tell us.
Well, I am exactly what it says on the tin. I am the compliance specialist. And what I do is I support businesses in regulation, one of those being GDPR compliance. I also support financial brokers with central bank compliance. So I suppose where your listeners are going to be interested in is the GDPR side of things. What I do is I carry out GDPR audits on small to medium-sized businesses, because I think at the end of the day, they're the ones that need the outside support. You know, when GDPR was launched initially, that's what we kind of found, that bigger organizations had the resources in place to put what was required from GDPR legislation. And it was the smaller and medium-sized businesses that were struggling a little bit. And it was kind of landing on, maybe, I suppose, the HR person, because there was an awful lot of personal data being processed there from employees and the like. So what I do is I come in and I have a look and see, we have an audit and we go down through all the different processes that are in place, and we look at what the current state of compliance is, and we identify then any gaps in that compliance. Then I go away and I put together a lovely report, and I'm able to feed back then any recommendations. And from that, then the support is ongoing. So there might be a case then that we need to have a look at a project, or there might be policies that need drafting or training that needs to be carried out. I also support charities specifically as well in their DPO requirements. So some charities might process, extra sensitive information, and as a requirement from the legislation, they need to have a DPO in place formally, that's registered with the DPC. So that's something that I can do as well, and I provide ongoing support there, on an ongoing basis as well. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, Deirdre.
Enough to keep you busy and out of trouble by the sounds of things, Margaret.
Just a little. This is my really busy time of the year, So between October now and March is kind of, and I suppose that's sort of, that's a natural occurrence, isn't it? So you're coming to the end of the year, and there's maybe something that's been on the risk register there for the last year or two, outstanding. Oh, we need to get this sorted, or we need to, have a look at this. So, and for final reports for the year, or so a business might need to have an audit done as a result, or starting a new year, everybody wants to have a fresh start, don't they? And, compliance starting off at the start of the year is a great time to start it, and a great time to kind of refresh and look at it. So that's, as a result, then feeds into my busy business around this time of year.
Amazing. I'm actually really interested to learn that you do the compliance part for the central bank, because I've had a lot of conversations with clients, and this might be a different conversation off the podcast, because I've had people reach out to me, given that my history was I used to be a bank manager. I have people reach out to me to talk to me about all of that sort of stuff when they're setting up their own maybe brokerage and things like that. So GDPR, what does it even stand for again? Remind me.
General Data Protection Regulation. I think
Okay.
it's one of those things that put the fear up some people, isn't it?
Get the heebie-jeebies when I think about it. And I suppose for me, when, and I don't know what other people are like, when this was coming out, there was so much hype about it. And then it came out in May, I can't even remember what year.
Right, 2018, yeah.
Yeah, there was so much hype about it for like 2 or 3 years beforehand. And I was working in the bank at the time. So, we had to get our ducks in a row and all that sort of stuff. But since 2021, I've been working for myself now, and I'm conscious of, I know what GDPR is. But like, I have never had that audit where somebody's come into my business and looked at my business and checked what is my current state. Nobody's ever created a report for me. I don't know what support I need. I think I'm doing things right, but I don't know. And so I'm concerned for myself, but also for my clients, that maybe we're just not doing things right. And that's why I really wanted to bring you on the show, Margaret. And on the last guest episode, we had Rebecca and Martin from UX and Y, and they actually started to talk about data and how we gather data and how we store and all that sort of stuff, which was just perfect timing because you were coming on next. And I was so excited when that happened. It was like, the planets were aligning to make that happen. But I suppose my concern is, and as I say, for myself and in my business and for my clients, is what do we need to be doing? Are we doing it right? And I know that it can take so long to build your brand reputation. It can be gone in seconds. Warren Buffett famously said that. So I suppose my question, Margaret, is what is GDPR? Let's start there, because there's so much in just what I just said. So let's just start there. What is GDPR?
Pare it all back.
Yeah.
Okay. So GDPR was introduced, as you rightly said, in 2018, and there was a huge amount of, I suppose, fanfare about it coming up to the time, and rightly so. And interestingly, there was always a data protection legislation in place since 1988. There was always some kind of guidance there for organizations to process data and to kind of responsibly manage data. But then along came the internet. And the internet was going so fast that the data protection legislation in its current form really wasn't able to keep up. So if you can remember, do you remember when you might enter a competition for some sort of a draw in a shopping center, or you're going to an event and you're filling out, you're given a business card in, and you might be entered into a draw as a result. And next thing, the next day, or maybe a couple of weeks down the line, you started receiving emails from that organization telling you all about their business and what fabulous products that they had. And you're going, where is this after coming from now? So what GDPR does, it actually restricts all of that. And it puts onuses on organizations to responsibly manage personal data and to kind of say, hey, you know what? You can't just take somebody's information and start using it, for your own, means to sell your own products, and you can't forward that information, to another third party and without getting consent or without the individual being aware of it. So it really, what it needed to do, the regulation, was look at it as a whole and look at all of the, I suppose, what is happening in the world today, what's out there, and how the internet is developing and what the current state of play was, and start putting restrictions in place, that organizations will have obligations on them to respectfully manage data. So there are 6 principles of GDPR. The first one being that when you're managing data, or you're processing data, is that you do it in a lawful, fair, and transparent basis. And what that means is that you don't take information from somebody, in a covert manner. Actually, from a GDPR perspective, from a legislative perspective, when you are going to collect information from somebody, you actually have to tell them how you're going to process that information before you take that information from them. Okay, so that's where we have privacy policies and all the like, and I'll touch on that in a little while. So that's the first principle of data protection. The second one is then that you have a legal basis in order to process that's part of the legal basis, is part of lawfulness, that you would have a legal basis in order to process the data. That's where consent comes in, and the likes of contractual, if you have a contract with somebody that you're providing your services to, well, then it's I suppose fair enough and reasonable to expect that you have to collect their information in order to process that data. And you have a contract in place to supply a service. You might be relying, as I said earlier, on consent. Then there's lots and lots of different scenarios whereby you would process information. There's 6 in total, whereby you might be able to rely on legal basis. I'm not going to get heavy into that. But contractual obligation and consent are probably the main 2, and maybe legitimate interest as well are probably the main 3 that generally an organization would rely upon in order to process that data. Another principle of data then of GDPR is understanding how long you hold on to data for, and not holding on to data for longer than is necessary. Making sure that you collect information for one purpose and you're not going to use it again for a different purpose. And then also making sure that you're actually only holding on to, you're only collecting the information that you need in order to carry out your task. So a lot of these things are actually really, really common sense, and they're really respectful, I suppose, of, somebody's personal data. And then the final one then is making sure that you have proper security in place for protecting the data that you have, and depending on the type of data that you process. So if you have processed, it's all relative to the type of security that you must have in place. So like if you process names and email addresses, well, that's going to be a lot different to an organization or a business that's collecting information on somebody's health or medical information or sexual orientation. So that type of information needs to have extra levels of security in place. And then accountability is actually brings it all in together to kind of say everybody needs to be accountable for their actions. Everybody needs to be accountable for how they process data. And that's where the fines, those massive fines that we hear about that were bandied over our heads for so long and threatened with for breaching GDPR. That's where the whole fine element comes into place. But just having that responsibility in managing data and having that secure element in place is really, really, really important. It all feeds back into what you were saying earlier, Deirdre, about, your brand and your reputation. Because if you don't have all of those things in place, well, then, somebody could look at you and say, they're not really, I'm getting emails from these guys. I didn't tell them that I could process their data, or I'm looking for information from them and they're not coming back to me. There is now steps in place whereby somebody can report a company or business to the Data Protection Commission. And as a result of that, there could be an investigation into your business, So there are different processes in place to kind of keep us, on the straight and narrow there as well.
Okay, let me just go back because there's so much to unpack there as well. Your answer was as good as my first long question. And really detailed, Margaret, thank you. And actually, I think really clear. So let me just check, right? Because this is actually a fantastic reminder for me for my business right now. So the 6 principles of GDPR is that you're doing it and gathering your information in a lawful, fair, and transparent way. The second one is consent. Make sure that you get consent and that you adhere to or comply with any contractual obligations. The third one is legitimate interest, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And the fourth one was how long you hold on to data for. That was huge in the bank, actually. It was, there's different regulations around different things in terms of timelines and stuff. So I might ask you a bit more around that. And then only collecting info you need makes total sense. And then proper security and accountability around what information you take. So have I got them all?
Well, you have your purpose limitations there, that you're only collecting, you're collecting for one purpose, and you're not using it for a different purpose. So if you need to use it again, well, then collect it again and make sure that they know that that's the reason that you're collecting it.
Right.
And then restrict the type of information that you are collecting. So really examine what it is that you're collecting and kind of say, do I actually need this email address? Am I going to use this? Am I collecting this just in case, or nice to have, or do I actually need this in order to carry out my job or whatever the task is at hand?
Okay, so let me just clarify then. Legitimate interest, is that what that is? It's where you're asking for information that you actually need to carry out the job and the task at hand. Is that what legitimate interest is?
So legitimate interest is one of the legal bases. So legitimate interest, contractual obligation, and consent, they actually all tie in with the first principle, that you must have you must be lawful about how to process the data. Legitimate interest then is always one that I suppose can catch people. And the best way that I have of describing legitimate interests is that you're processing information. Say, for example, you are processing third-party data. And for any of your listeners that might have employees, or might, for some reason, might need to collect third-party information, say next of kin, for example. Okay, so you have your employees, you need to have a next of kin name, contact details in place in order for those employees, should anything happen, that you know who you're going to contact. Mm-hmm. Your legitimate, or your legal basis for collecting that data is based on legitimate interests. And there's a little test that you kind of apply to collecting information based on legitimate interests. It is what I'm doing legal? Okay. Would the individual be surprised to realize, or to understand, or to know that I have their information? So coming back to the whole scenario of, well, it's for next of kin contact details. Well, no, actually, if my husband company wants to have my details on file as next of kin, he works with the company, I am his spouse. So it's actually reasonable to expect that my information would be held on their file. And then the last thing is that the individual, if they objected to the processing of that information, that actually it would be withdrawn. So legitimate interest is kind of similar to consent in the fact that the consent to process can actually be withdrawn. So to answer your question, Deirdre, it's to round back, it's actually one of the legal bases in order for you to process the data. It's not a principle, but it's kind of viewed similar to consent. And so some organizations will use it maybe for the processing of CCTV because they want to protect, they have data that their property that they want to protect. But as a result of having CCTV, they're collecting all of this information of third party, people who are passing by and people who are being recorded on their CCTV. But actually their legitimate interest is that they want to protect their property. And it's kind of it's sort of almost like a secondary piece that those individuals are being captured on it. But if you saw yourself on CCTV and you were in a big shopping centre, well, it would be reasonable to expect that they are looking to protect their property and to make sure security is in place.
I can just picture myself in prime time there next to the person in committing a felony. But yeah, like you would assume that that's okay at the same time, despite, the potential connotations or whatever might happen there. Okay, that makes sense, Margaret. I totally get that. And let me ask you then, just in terms of data retention, how long then should you be storing information for? So let's say, right, a lot of my clients, I have a mixture of clients. Some of them have ongoing relationships with people. The relationship might last for 3 years, and most of my clients tend to be business to business. So the information they take is relevant to the business. So how long then should that information be retained for and kept?
Yeah, so I suppose it's down to understanding. It's down to understanding, I suppose, maybe there might be legal requirements or legislative requirements in order to hold on to the information for longer than, say, that, as you say, the client relationship has ended and the timeline for retention kicks in. So there's no prescriptive guidance from GDPR in relation to timelines. So really we have to look at them from a purpose of, well, would there be a situation that I could be audited at a later stage? Would there be a situation that the client might come back to me at a later stage? And if so, well, how long do I have, how long is that client allowed to come back to me in order to question, what happened, if they had a query or something had gone wrong. So a lot of the time you have situations whereby there is actually statutory requirements and there is legislation in place that says that you must hold on for a minimum of. And that's great for GDPR and it's great for businesses because there you have like workplace guidelines on, how long you hold on to, say, for example, payroll, or you requirements from revenue that you hold on to information for 6 years because revenue can audit you up to 6 years. So there's those type of guidance that are there and they fit in quite nicely then, as guidance for the retention timelines. But then there's ones that don't have the legislative guidance, that there's not statutory guidelines there from different regulatory bodies. One that I would always, I suppose, draw attention to clients would be that the statute of limitations for contract law is 6 years plus 1 in order to go through court proceedings. So that brings it to a nice round 7 years. So that means that if you have a contract out there you're after providing a service to an individual, or you have a personnel file or whatever, once it's depending on a contract and once it's relying on a contract, that individual has the 6 years if there is an issue with the contract to bring you to court. And then you're allowing that further 1 year. So in order to protect yourself and your business, that's why we kind of say, well, if all else fails, let's look at, what's the longest that's there, should you need to defend a claim that's been taken against you. And for everything else then, we generally do have statutory guidelines with the different regulatory bodies and different types of legislation that's there.
That makes sense, I think. And I think part of this as well, Margaret, for in my brain where it's going is, let's say, for example, again, my business is online. A lot of people store information online. They don't print things. So let's say I use at the moment, I might use DocuSign or PandaDoc or eSignature or Adobe for a contract. Let's just say when you mention contract. So that would be where I would go for contracts. Now that contract within it will have information about the client potentially. And that information could be just their name and their address. So that's information I need to be mindful of. But let's just imagine I don't print that, right? No, my lovely cupboards behind me are full of things. They're not full of client things. And so let's say then that I have this stored on a software online and maybe in my email. So should I be backing up that sort of information somewhere? Where should I be storing it? And what is best practice for that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I suppose what we always have to bear in mind in those regards is when we have things that are stored online is, yeah, right, you're right, that how do I start to implement the timelines there, So if something that is stored on a different platform, to an extent, it's it's fine for as long as you're using that platform, and should it be a case then that you decide that you're no longer going to use their services, that platform or the data processor that's holding all of that information, you're entitled then to actually get them either to delete it or to get, you can download all of the information that you would have and place it somewhere then that you can put your hand to, not necessarily on paper-based files, somewhere on an Excel or somewhere on Word or whatever it is, whatever form that you're using, to provide like Office suite services. And once we have it stored in the cloud, now these days, it's a lot easier to put your hand to it. So I would recommend having an area that you're able to put your hand to in terms of where all your client information is held, something that you're going to continuously be using. And, if you have a CRM, that's something that, can be used on an ongoing basis as well. And I suppose then it's having the processes in place whereby you have a process whereby you are able to say, okay, well, look, I'm after that information or that relationship with the client has ended and it ended on this day. Well, now I just make a note on my Excel sheet. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just making a note on my Excel sheet, having a retention schedule of all of your clients and who it is, how long it is that you're going to be holding onto their information for. And then in the 7 years time or whatever the case may be, that that you can go in and delete that information. So keeping it online, I think, Deirdre, is really it's probably the easiest for a lot of businesses, because also you have the functionality that's there, that's, you're able to search for information as well, easier than you might be able to do it if it's on a paper file too. And another thing as well from a holding on to information as well is we also have to be aware that, if we're holding on to people's information, they have a right to that information. They have a right to ask you to know what it is that you're holding. So it's in your best interest as an organization or a small business to understand and be aware of where all your information is being held, that you can put your hand to it and reproduce it in a way that can be issued out to that client. And emails are another thing, I suppose one of the big what's the word hints in processing information is, unless you really need to hold on to it, in order to to mitigate any of those risks and to, not have any security issues, is just not hold on to it in the first place. So really, like, the emails are probably one of the main pieces of higgledy-piggledy kind of filing systems that people have in place, and can use it as a library, I suppose, of something to be able to put your hand to in relation to a client. But like that falls under GDPR as well, and we have to, and retention timelines apply there too.
That's so interesting because I have 8,000 and something emails in my inbox, and most of them are promotional spam stuff that I haven't opted out to. You'd be glad to hear, right? And I actually said to my virtual assistant this week, I'm like, okay, that's a job I'm going to get you to do for me, is to go in there and clear out that inbox and organize the heck out of me, because I'm all over the shop right now. And like, I just read the client ones and all of that sort of stuff. But I suppose, what happens then if you accidentally delete something that maybe you were supposed to keep? What do you do there?
I know. And look, I mean, I suppose that's just life. I mean, that's not that's a general day-to-day issue, isn't it? It's not just GDPR, and because now these days there is no backup. You don't have a backup to once it's deleted. Certainly, I see that message popping up on my system when I delete a file. It's deleted everywhere, and that has to do with GDPR. So that once you are deleting something, that you're reassured that there isn't something lurking somewhere, in another area of the system. But yeah, I mean, it's a case of, if it's deleted, well, go back to the drawing board and see can you recover it in some way, or get your IT people in place, or back to the client again.
And there's a couple of things you touched on, Margaret, there. You mentioned a couple of things that I want to go back on. So firstly is email, signs and consent. So if I forget to ask you, there are the three things I want to talk to you about, right? So the first thing is email. So part of what I do with clients is I help them to grow an email list, because with social media platforms like LinkedIn, we're here streaming live on LinkedIn. We're also streaming to Facebook and YouTube and all the places. But those platforms own the audience. You don't own them when you're streaming there. And so you have full autonomy when you have an email list. So there's two questions with this. Firstly is consent for opting in. And like, secondly then, and this is kind of ties into the same question, is that my audience is not all in Ireland. 15% of my listeners to this show are based in the United States. 10% are in America. Another 10% are in the UK. So that's like nearly 25-30% of my audience is not in Ireland. And so does GDPR apply there? What do I need to be mindful of in that way? And do the opt-in sort of consent rules change?
There's a lot in there. So I suppose what is really reassuring to know is that we have got such a high level of data protection and benchmarking in the EU, that other countries are modeling their regulation on our GDPR. So there's nobody really that can touch us in that regard. And even the Californian CCPA wouldn't even be up. They have their own rules, but I suppose they wouldn't be as stringent as our own. And the UK, since they left Brexit, just literally went, we're copying GDPR because we were already in there, and we'll add a few extras ourselves. So the template is there, and the template is at quite a high level. So that's first piece. Second piece then is in relation to consent from emails and opting in. Yes. So we'll go back to where we were talking about legal basis in order to process your data. And you obviously need to rely on consent when you're sending out information, but you need to hold confirmation of that consent. So a lot of, and I don't know whether we're allowed to mention different platforms here, but there are certain platforms that help you, issue out those direct mailing campaigns or the like, and they are aware of GDPR requirements, and they allow for the opt-in consent piece to be integrated into the process. So all of the consent pieces are going to be held in the likes of your campaigners, your email campaign platforms, and you can hold on to it there. The key is that if somebody withdraws that consent, that you must make sure that you update the consent list and make sure that you take them off of it, because there's plenty of organizations and companies that are up in the courts because of that purpose. Direct mailing campaigns have been going out, individual withdraws their consent, and it's not updated on on the business's systems, and the direct mailing campaign continues, and the individual still gets the emails. Then in relation to, sorry, go on. Yeah.
There to I just ask you about that, right? So with the opt-in, double opt-in, is that what you're talking about? Do we have to do double opt-in, Margaret? Please tell me we don't have to do double opt-in. Tell me.
You see, I like, it is lovely, isn't it? It's lovely to see. It's that extra kind of step. And when I am asked to do a double opt-in, I go, they have their GDPR sorted, don't they? Me too.
Well, you might be unique in that, train of thought. What I, from a marketing perspective, is that people want the freebie that you're offering them, and typically, and I've looked at statistics on this, like only about a third of people actually go ahead and give you, like, do that double opt-in piece. And it's so hard to build that email list and get them in the first place. So tell me, Margaret, do we have to do double opt-in?
You don't have to do double opt-in, Deirdre.
Here's it to my ears. Fantastic. Okay, so that's great. And then I'm interested, you mentioned about, let's say, US and in California and how they work, and that makes total sense as well. And that in the UK now that they have their own systems in place. And so let's just go back, because you touched on that point about opting out and unsubscribing. I know there's things I've tried to opt out for actually on text message as opposed to email. And it says reply to 50, whatever the number is, to opt out from these text messages. And no matter how many times I send that, it doesn't opt me out. It's really annoying. So, like, you know, the tools that you're talking about, I think, are built. So the one I always recommend here, because it's easy, is Flowdesk, MailChimp, MailerLite, ActiveCampaign. All of those big name ones are pretty good at having those systems and tools in place so that you can easily set them up and comply with GDPR in my experience. But let's say text message ones, I've not come across a text message one and how to do that. Have you got any light to shed in that one, Margaret?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't. I mean, I'm assuming that because it's not something I come across quite regularly myself in terms of text messaging subscriptions. And to me, it's a case that they're not actually keeping an eye on what's coming back in. You know, I mean, they need to be actively keeping an eye on the replies to because it is going somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, and they are receiving it, so they just need to update their you know, their subscription lists. But it's the same. The same goes for, you know, for the unsubscribe piece for email. You know, automatic email subscriptions that come out. You know, I can't tell you how many times I unsubscribe and you still get the emails out. But you know what? It is something that really needs to be looked at closely by companies, because that is one of the most common reasons the DPC would be in court.
Yes.
You know,
And so talk to me about that then. So the DPC is the Data Protection Commission, right? Let's say a small business like me, mine are all through a system that I use where the unsubscribe feature literally appears in the bottom of my emails when people have them, right? And not when I'm like emailing it, but when I'm emailing you, Margaret, to come on the podcast, you know, that's just like my regular email. But my mailing list, if you like, that has the unsubscribe option. And so let's imagine that you tried to opt out and it didn't, for whatever reason, work, and you get more emails. You can bring me through the DPC and I can get fined, right? Talk to me about that and what sort of fines we're talking about, and like what are the worst sort of things you've seen happen to small businesses?
Yeah, so I suppose, look, it's if somebody wants to report you, if somebody wants to complain, that's probably the how you are going to come to under the DPC's radar, is that if somebody is going to report you that they're still getting those annoying text messages, or those what they view as being annoying, because they want to unsubscribe. And they report to the DPC. If it is a case that the DPC they obviously are going to investigate it and look to you to see what processes that you have in place, and you become under their radar. So they start to investigate you. They look at what processes you have in order to carry out the opt-out option. Now, this is an example, I suppose, just of one type of a case. And if it is a case, and you know what, they're not the big bad wolf, they're very receptive and they're very open to, oh, you didn't realize, but that's okay. It's something that was an oversight, and it happened once, and they may look at it in that way. If it's something that continues to happen, and if it's a case that you're not going to change your processes, or there's a glitch in the system that you don't realize, and it continues and continues and continues, then it is a case that they end up bringing you to court. And I suppose if that individual discovers that they're still getting more and more texts from you or emails from you. The fines itself, fines are, they're relatively small, because it's the privacy regulation that it falls under. Once you get into that element of fines, so like we're saying maybe 500, 1,500, it is the kind of lower end of the spectrum in that regard. But then you're published, your name could be published on their annual report, so it is out to, they do name and shame when it comes to going to court. So again, that's your brand again, and for a small business, it's one thing. For a larger business, but for a small business, that can be really, really damaging. I think I've lost you, Deirdre.
I'm chatting away and I'm on.
There you are.
I put myself on mute because my dogs were barking. But anyway, I was just kind of saying there, I think that's really, actually, it's reassuring to know, firstly, that the fines are not astronomical. But secondly, it's not reassuring to know that they name you, because the last thing you want is for your brand to be searched and like GDPR compliance breach to come up, and some detrimental, not like what Michael O'Leary would say with Ryanair, is that every publicity is good publicity. It's certainly not good publicity.
Okay, for him to say, yeah, right.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the things that's come into my mind there with that as well, Margaret, is, let's say, in terms of that data side and being fined, and is there any way to, what am I trying to say? I don't even know what I'm trying to say now, because it's not the simplest of topics to wrap your brain around, even though it should be, in the sense that it should all just make sense and common sense to do what you're doing. But I think what I'm trying to ask and understand is, let's say, from a privacy perspective, and let's imagine you get hacked, and you have done your best with that proper security piece, and your passwords, and you're there, and you're holding your team or anybody in your business accountable in terms of the security. But you get hacked and somebody complains or reports you to the DPC. Like, what does that look like then? Or does that happen where you've taken every measure possible? Like, what happens there?
I suppose, unfortunately, you haven't taken every measure possible, and look, I suppose, the human element, that, like, we are our own weakest links, really. So it is a case of somebody clicked on a link, and it led to some ransomware or something been downloaded to your computer, and as a result, then, all hell breaks loose. I suppose, you know what, Deirdre, the DPC is not the worst of our fears, in that regard. And what's really bad is the fact that you've been hacked, And if it is a case, okay, looking at it from both sides, if it is a case that you have been hacked, you do have to report it to the DPC. You have to report it within 72 hours of it happening, and then looking at the type of information then that has been hacked. So if it's names and addresses and email addresses, that's, possibly publicly known anyway, that's less of an impact to the individual whose information is potentially out there. But if it's financial information, or information that could be used against, in terms of identity fraud or something like that, that has more impact on an individual, well, then that's a lot more serious. And the DPC do like they do step in there. Individuals need to be informed because there's a high risk to their data and to their rights and freedoms. And the idea of 72 hours as well, and the idea of that short window to report is so that action can be taken quite quickly. If it is a case that individuals say their credit card details or some bank details or something like that were hacked and were put out into or gotten to by hackers, that they have an opportunity to take steps to protect themselves. So they have an opportunity to cancel credit cards. They have an opportunity to talk to their bank to let them know, that they can take steps. And then after that, then, radar, you will be under the DC's radar, and they're going to be looking at you and what processes you have in place and what security measures you have in place, and looking for, who has access to information, and getting to the root of how it happened. And unfortunately, that's just a process that you go through, and it could be a case then that they do end up in court and they do fine you. But to me, that's not to getting that far, that's not the scary bit. The scary bit actually is the hackers getting there in the first place,
Yeah.
And you actually couldn't keep up with, what's going on out there. And one thing, if I can get one message out there, and we do hear it over and over and over again, but passwords these days are just, there's a thing of the past. There is a hilarious, I don't know whether you've seen it, George, the Michael McIntyre that he does on passwords, and where we all brought we had to bring out a password, or passwords are introduced, and then you have to change them. So you thought of a certain name, and then you had to change them and put a number on, so everybody had whatever the password was with the number 1 at the end.
Yeah.
And then you might put 1 and an exclamation mark after that. Criteria changed. But unfortunately, there are programs out there that they use the programs to come up with all alternatives of passwords. So passwords really, in this day and age, they're not secure enough. So whatever data that you're holding, if it is sensitive data, and if it's data that isn't out there already in the public domain, you have a responsibility to have the appropriate security measures in place. And annoying and all as it is, two-factor authentication, it really is the step that needs to be put in place. And you do see a lot of platforms and a lot of systems introducing it now. It's becoming quite regular, but it really is. They're gone too advanced. They're gone too sophisticated for us, from a passport perspective, to rely solely on that.
That's really good advice, Margaret. And actually, somebody else gave me that advice about 18 months or 2 years ago around the password piece. And I use LastPass. And LastPass is, you have one master password to get in, and it creates different passwords for everything that you access. And you can grant access to somebody else behind the scenes to get in with a particular password as well. You can give them licenses behind the scenes. And it just means then that you have a different password for absolutely everything. And you don't need to write them all down or remember them anywhere, because you just have one master password. And honestly, the reason why I set this up was because when the power went at home and we needed to log back into Apple TV, to Netflix, to Disney, that my family were all driving me nuts. The kids were like, "Mom, come in here and sign back in." And I'm like, oh my God, they're driving me nuts. So now I have them all set up with like LastPass access, and they can get into everything when the power goes. I'm like, okay, it was a time saving tool, but actually in the business, it's been a blessing as well, because with the people on my team, then it's like, give them access. I know what systems they need access to. They don't need access to everything. They just need access to certain things. And then that keeps things tidy, and I can remove it if and when I need to as well, which is really good. So LastPass, folks, for anybody listening, if you've not heard of that, I'd recommend it. Margaret, have you heard of LastPass? Would you endorse it as well?
Haven't heard of it, Deirdre. Well, you'd be always up on a lot more on the technology now in helping with people's businesses. But I suppose, yeah, look, again, the password is great, and it is great to have, kind of a one-stop shop in that regard. But depending on the type of password, the personal data that it is actually protecting from, you need to kind of step it up a little bit and have that two-factor authentication to your phone or to the email in order to grant to grant permission to access as well. So I suppose that's we might
Okay.
mightn't agree on that one there, Georgia.
Well, no, seriously, check out LastPass. It is good. Like, the passwords are between 16 and 20 characters long for every single thing. So how it works is, to get into the passwords, you need a master password, and that has to be 16 or 20 characters. And then within that, you can access all of the passwords for all of the different tools. So it is good and secure, and you can have an extension on your browser then to help you log in, so you don't save the things to, like, and I remember being at an IT thing where it was IT security many years ago, and the guy who gave the presentation said, don't save your passwords in your phone, like, your Apple passwords on your phone. And it's the same for your browser. Don't save them, any things to your browser. But LastPass prevents you from having to do that. So if you
Right.
get hacked, they can't access your passwords.
Mhm.
Or if your laptop or your phone gets stolen, they still can't access your password,
Yes.
because they need that master password to get in. So it is a good tool. And as I say, somebody recommended that to me. But something that's really becoming prominent to me, Margaret, based on everything you're talking about, is systems and processes. And I see this a lot with the businesses that I work with. They don't all necessarily have proper CRM systems to capture and store all of their information from clients in one place. If emails come in, the emails are not stored under a client database, maybe. Things like different platforms storing different information for people and not having passwords at all. And I think, going back to what you said at the very start, and what's really jumping out at me, is that every business, if you're serious about growing your business, scaling your business, or selling your business down the line, you need Margaret or somebody like Margaret to come in and do this audit for you and find out where you're exposed, because it can have such a detrimental effect on your brand if you do get caught out or fined or hacked or any of those things. So, Margaret, have you anything to add to that, or final tips, or anything that you want to share? Anything you haven't touched on yet that you're like?
I suppose I do actually, and I suppose it's just something that I wanted to touch on because GDPR, there can be so many layers in GDPR, and sometimes for just a smaller business, there are just kind of certain things that you just need to have in place without overwhelming yourself. What I would say is, first thing is, have a privacy policy on your website, okay? Because ultimately your website is your shop window, and you need to be able to prove or show that you are responsible with people's data. And again, that's the whole, we must tell people how we're using their data, or what we're doing with their data before we start collecting their data. And that's why privacy policy on your website is actually a great way to kind of tick that box. And then have any of your notifications, so any of your forms that you need to get signed by a client or anything like that, you can just have a little one-liner on it, just saying, for information on how we process your data, go to our privacy policy on the website. The second thing,
Let me ask you that, okay? Because no, actually, that's a really great point. I'm so glad that you brought that up. So, privacy policy. Can I go on to Google and search privacy policy document that complies with GDPR, or do I need something a bit more specific than that?
Yeah, so look, there are certain elements, there are certain statutory requirements that you must have displayed on a privacy policy. And a privacy policy, a lot of the time, a web developer will put a standard privacy policy on a website that just covers the personal data that is being processed through the website. So the web developer is doing their job. They're covering the information that's going on the website, that's coming through the website. But actually, you want it to reflect everything that is going on within your business. So you need to understand what it is, what type of personal data that you're processing, the legal basis that you're processing it for, how long you're holding on to it. Are you transferring it outside of the EEA? Do you have the appropriate measures in place? There are certain elements that you have to include there, but they have to be specific for you, and you have to have certain elements. You have to give contact details there. So look, while you can get templates off of Google and wherever, you need to make it personal to your business and for it to reflect what it is, that your business is doing. And that's something that we help out with as well in the compliance specialist. We sit down, we have a chat, we understand, what it is that you're doing within the business. We kind of delve into the type of personal data. We ask you specific questions and we can put together a privacy policy for you.
Excellent. Thanks for
But
that.
it does have to be specific.
That makes total sense because, I can just see myself even. That's what I did a couple of years ago. I went onto Google, looked up privacy policy, and then it was like, that's where I got mine from. But I'm ready for the next level. So thank you for that. I will be on to you later, Margaret. And okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted clarity on that for anybody else who maybe where I was doing what I would have done before. So, okay, keep going, share some more.
So the other thing I would say to you, I know we've touched on the whole fines and we touched on the DPC and, on all of those things that are kind of hanging over us, but actually what I find since I started the compliance specialist back in 2019, where I see the drive for compliance is actually peer-to-peer compliance. So if you are linking in or if you're partnering up with another entity, another business, and you're going to, whether they're a data processor, and they're going to process data on your behalf, and whether it is that you're going to partner up with them to provide a service, smaller businesses are finding that there is a requirement generally from the bigger company. They're carrying out their due diligence on the smaller company, and it should be both ways. I'm not saying it's a bigger or a smaller piece. There is an element that the compliance piece comes in as a result of that due diligence being carried out. So what businesses are finding is that they've been asked for a data protection policy. That's a little bit more detailed than a privacy policy. They've been asked for a data protection policy, and they might be asked to sign a contract on data sharing. And they might be asked for other questions, where's your server held or where do you store your information? And that's all part of the due diligence that's been carried out by the partner or the third party that they're going into business with. So actually, we're finding that it's not a case that it's the DPC or the fines or anything like that that's leading us down the road of being compliant. It's if you're going for funding somewhere, if you're applying for a grant, if you're, linking up with, a government body, there is a requirement there for you to prove your GDPR compliance. And how you do that is having your data protection policy in place, having your privacy policy on your website and making sure all of that is in order. And then you might be asked to sign a data sharing or a data processing contract as well. So those are just things just to bear in mind, as you grow and as your business grows and as you explore different ventures with different organizations and businesses.
Fantastic, Margaret. Thank you so much for that. And that makes total sense. And I suppose really just reiterates the importance of GDPR compliance and privacy policy and being respectful and doing things the right way when it comes to people's information. And I think overall, what's really coming through to me, and it's a lovely reminder, is that GDPR is so important, but it literally can make or break your brand if you're not careful. And we need you, Margaret. We need you and the compliance specialists to come in and keep this on and check and make sure we're doing things right. So final wrap up, Margaret, what's happening for you in 2024? What can we expect from you and the business?
Yeah, so we're just busy and busier. I have a new website, the compliancespecialist.ie, if anybody wants to check it out. Very proud of it. And as I said, it's my busy time of the year. You don't see me really. I'm coming up for air a little bit, Deirdre. You know, I'm normally behind audits and client files at this stage. And so, yeah, it's going to be a busy next few months. And then we are just, you know, I'm focusing on both sides of the business. GDPR element is out there, and we'll talk again about the broker support side. But there's plenty going on in the next year or so anyway. And you'll see a lot more of me.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to share all of your links and all access to all of your social media platforms and all of those things in the show notes. So folks, anybody listening, thank you so much for joining us on the Master Your Business podcast. Thank you to our fantastic guest, Margaret Julian, the compliance specialist. And Margaret, I wish you every success for 2024 and beyond.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, and likewise.